I'm from City Science. If you haven't heard of us, we're a data and software company based in the southwest. We're probably most known for our work on connected and autonomous vehicles for the National Infrastructure Commission. But I'm not going to talk about connected and autonomous vehicles today. I'm going to talk about something which, on paper, probably sounds less exciting, but I have 8 minutes to actually convince you that I think it could have profound effect on the way that we do planning in this country and the way that we think about modelling of infrastructure. So I'm going to be talking about version control, but before I do that, I'm just going to focus on some of the transport-specific problems that you might have encountered. So, for example, have you ever had to manage large distributed teams working on a transport model? Have you ever had to make changes to a transport model but lost them? If you have, that's probably not one that you're likely to admit, but maybe someone in your team's done that. Have you ever lost track of all the assumptions that went into the latest version of the transport model? Have you ever wanted to prove that a particular change stopped your transport model converging? Have you ever had to maintain multiple versions of a model with many different scenarios, most likely? And have you ever wanted to see how much work is being done, where, and by whom? Maybe. If you've had any of those issues, version control could be the solution for you. So version control is simply a system that keeps track of every change to a file or a set of files over time. Essentially, users can see what's changed, when it's changed, and who's changed it. And a consequence of this is that version control enables multiple people to work on the same files at the same time, whilst maintaining a clear process by which you can validate and authorize the changes that have been made. So version control as a technology has been around for about 10 years. It's the same technology that's used in SharePoint and Dropbox, but it's only recently that we've really begun thinking about this from an infrastructure perspective. And I guess one of the additional challenges that you have with changes to transport models or changes to models of infrastructure is that they're very difficult often to be able to see. Often what you encounter is something like this, where you've got one file, version 1, and you've got Simon's edits that you want to integrate, you want to understand what the differences are, and you're presented with two different files. Traditionally, you'd have to port those into a GIS system. What's ultimately needed is a very visual track of those changes. And so modern version control systems integrated with GIS can do this for you today. So we think there are immediate productivity benefits for your team by using version control. Certainly distributed and collaborative working. So with a version control system, you can now work on the train, you can work from home, working on models which traditionally you haven't been able to do, those sorts of workflows. All of the changes that you make to the models will be tracked within the system, and you can always revert back to a state where you knew that things were working. And you can quickly identify what's changed, why it's changed, and when it changed and who changed it. And you can do that geospatially, but you can also look at that in terms of traditional transport modeling code, which often is quite daunting to understand how to read and where the changes have been made. So, very simply, version control is a great technology. I'm going to give you a very brief explanation as to how it works, and then give you 3 examples as to where I think it will be able to take the industry. So I'm going to introduce the concept of branching. So let's assume that Alice wants to start work. I've got 2 fictional transport modelers for this, Alice and Bob. Alice wants to start work on a new transport model for London Victoria, so she starts her work. Separately, Bob wants to add some saturation flows to update the junctions around Buckingham Palace. And he wants to do it while he's on the train. Or he can now do that because he's using version control. So Bob creates what's called a branch of Alice's model. And this is the model in which Bob will make his changes. Bob makes some changes, but while he's doing that, Alice also makes some changes. Bob's now happy with the changes, and he wants to send them back to Alice to merge into the model. He sends what's called a merge request. Alice can essentially accept the changes that she wants and reject the changes that she doesn't want. And essentially that process goes on, and that's how you collaborate to build a model within version control. Taking that simple idea, I just want to show you 3 examples of where I think it will move the industry. So imagine the first scenario. You have a base year model, you have another scheme, you have various future years, you have lots of scenarios that you want to hold in one place. N scenarios and N years. What happens today if you find an issue in your base year model? Well, you need to go and manually change that in all of the different models that you've created. With a version control system, if you've made the change, you can essentially pull the change that you want through to all of the other models, saving time and minimizing any of the risks. So, a second example. This is where I think version control can really help collaborate across organizations if it's being used across organizations. So let's assume that you're a new regional transport body and you want to create a new model. Well, actually, there's great models that already exist in the Highways England regional models or in other local models that you could bring together. Version control will enable you to take a branch of those models, make the changes that you want, and then you've got a new model that you can use. But what's more important is if Highways England then make a new change to their underlying model, and you need to update your model for those changes, you can pull the changes through. Likewise, if you, as a regional transport body, make a change or add a new junction or add a new road, and Highways England wants to incorporate that back into their model, they can pull the changes through. So it's a great way of enabling people to collaborate across organisations. But the final thing, and I think this is probably the most exciting for me, is the idea that version control can help us digitise the planning process. So if you think about the planning process today, there's large developments go in, tons of work goes into understanding what's going on with those junctions or the transport modes around those big developments. And invariably what happens is all of that understanding, all of that knowledge goes into a PDF report, which is very difficult to access. Well, let's assume we did it through version control. Let's assume we're Oxfordshire and we're building a new garden town in Bicester, for example. If the developer could pull the branch of the new model, update the model, update all of the junctions within that model, then they could submit the digitised version of that model back to Oxfordshire as part of the planning process. We'd be able to go from a situation where we have a PDF to Oxfordshire having a model which is continuously updated. And I think that there's a real aspiration that that's where we want to be with transport models. Models that can be continuously updated at a lower cost to local authorities. So essentially, we think that version control is an essential component of moving to this world where we have live models. And it's the same in the transportation world, the water, infrastructure, it's the same in buildings. If you're maintaining a mathematical model of anything, you need to know when something changes and you need to have a way of bringing those changes through. So essentially, we've created a platform called Cadence, which we give version control for free to local authorities. It's one of many kind of workflow improvement tools that come for free within Cadence. We're demoing it out in the foyer, so I'd be very happy to talk to you about version control or connected autonomous vehicles if you wish.